Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this episode again. Today, we are going to talk about scaling AI in trust and cybersecurity domain. So, handing it over to Abhiram to see how this exciting topic goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hi, Rohit. Hi, Hasit.
Hi.
First of all, hello. First of all, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome today two industry stalwarts. I think I'll be honest. I've followed both of you over the last couple of decades, and especially the kind of work that you both have achieved in your respective organizations over the last decade, which we call it as the reinception of the AI industry. And what you've done in the AI services market is phenomenal. So thank you, first of all, for that. Let me do a quick introduction of our two panelists today. So we have Rohit Adlakha, who is truly an AI and digital revolutionary. He's currently servicing as the executive advisor at ZScaler. And we have Hasit Trivedi, who is the global head of AI at Tech Mahindra. Welcome both of you to AI Talks with Tech Mahindra.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Great.
Thanks, Abhi. Yeah.
Great. So today we are going to talk about specifically about scaling AI, as our theme has always been amplifying and scaling AI. So let's go into a topic which is very close to scaling AI, which is all about trust and security. So the theme today is going to be all around trust and security. And let me start with a rather interesting one. So today we see in the market, or rather as users ourselves, we see a lot of data. We see say the number of data feeds that we get across different spectrums, the kind of digitization that we have in terms of different apps, social media, and all of that. So there's a lot of information overload, if I may call it today. And with that in account, we are seeing that there's a trust deficit overall. So firstly, I wanted to ask you, maybe I'll start with you, Rohit, on whether you see AI as a trust deficit inducer or whether you see it as a trust deficit mitigator.
This question itself can be a tongue twister, but if you ask me, so it's been about 6 decades since the term artificial intelligence was coined, John McCarthy. And the whole idea was that can you actually imitate or mimic the human brain? And I don't think so machines have reached there yet, even though they predict that by 2030, they will become smarter than humans. But who knows? We keep watching sci-fi movies. The challenge is that in the entire evolution of human history, as we progress through the industrial revolutions and as technology advances, the human touch is gradually decreasing. And as a result, we have started coming more in contact with machines, whether it's a mobile phone or a laptop or a tablet machine, or of course, Netflix on our television. The amount of time that we are spending with the machines, even though we may be physically with someone, has gone up tremendously. And our ability to use our cognitive capabilities is slowly coming down because we are focusing so much on information knowledge, which the Googles give you at the click of a button or a Wikipedia. So slowly the challenge is that the trust factor between humans is actually coming down, and each one of us is becoming an individual millennial, instead of what we call a cohesive, human race of 7.8 billion people. Now, AI is like a child. You can keep teaching it the way you want. So if you teach it to be trustworthy in terms of transparency, in terms of auditability, in terms of accountability for all its actions, then definitely it can be a trust inducer. But if it's going to mimic the human, the way we behave, then it will take on all the traits, positive and not so positive, alongside. So when biases start creeping in, when decisions start, being overshadowed by factors which are outside of a objective decision making, that's the time AI, which mimics the human mind, becomes a deficit inducer in that sense. So my simple view is that AI will mimic the human until the human race itself doesn't evolve and passes on the ideal scenario to the machines. They will only be going down a downward spiral, and it will be unfair for us to start blaming them, whereas we are the originators of the trust deficit, or the inducers, if I may say so.
Great. Thanks. Hasit, your views?
I think Rohit put it very well that AI is like a small kid, correct? And it's up to you to teach how you want to teach that. And every human being can be a teacher. So you as a human being can be biased, can be unfair, can be non-accountable. But when you wear a hat of teacher, then you have to be doing right thing, correct? If the teacher is good, the student in this case is AI, correct? I think that is no reason it will not be performing good. Having said that, so yes, it's function of teacher. So if you teach well, it will be trustworthy. It will be responsible in a all form and shape. It goes well in the current adoption of AI, where the most of the use cases are of that nature, which are not that harming. But if you fast forward 5 years from now or a decade, probably we'll be dealing with the AI-led robotics, which can be harmful at times. Usage of that in terrorism and border activities, or deepfakes of the world, which can create a newer kind of frauds kind of thing, correct? And the metaverse bringing the newer AI avatars. So once we go into a extreme end of the possibility, which is a most complex world, which will force it in coming years, I think that it can tend to become it's an intruder also, correct? And with the, for example, in cybersecurity space, quantum and AI can be so rapidly breach all the security aspect, because the cost of the intrusion or cost of attack is reduced. Correct? With the amount of attacks you can make per second will significantly increase. Now that technology potentially is moving ahead faster than the defense technology. Correct? Now, whenever there is a gap of attack technology and the defense technology, and defense is just following the attack, I think it's not moving ahead. And in that scenario, there is a potential gap between attacker versus defender. Both are AI-led, so AI-led intruder and AI-led defender. Correct? Now with this gap, unless defender starts moving ahead in the game, it will be AI can become an intruder also, and that will create a trust deficit in all the aspects. So I think it's as long as the current adoption goes, I think it's up to teacher. Yes, if you teach well, if you're being aware of being responsible AI, I think it will be taken care. But I think we need to be more smarter as a human being to be ready for create right defense system to figure out how to deal with the upcoming wave of the technology merging, because the quantum AI and many metaverse, all this coming to a rapid speed. Hopefully, that defense mechanism will also be moving at same space.
Sure. Thank you. I think both of you in your respective answers have given me ideas for the next at least 5 to 6 different AI Talks episodes. There's so many terms. There's the wider spectrum that you've given. So thank you for that. With that, let me move further and rather focus this conversation towards enterprises now. So going forward, given our focus as an industry is to say help enterprises scale AI. So from an enterprise standpoint, if I were to narrow down the lens to trust and security, what are the challenges that scaling AI initiatives are facing today? And again, maybe I'll start with Rohit. What are your views on that?
One is that people have started moving user experience to be the center of the universe rather than technology, which a lot of us are, very used to. And I was a CIO of a large organization, apart from wearing the hat of AI. Sure. And somewhere we had a mindset that, we are the kings and queens of the universe and everyone has to be following us. And then very quickly we realized that it's the end user who's the, ultimate customer.
Sure.
The second thing is this entire paradigm of being non-intrusive and providing seamless access with a fantastic user experience for any time, any device, anywhere is a paradigm that everyone is following. Mm-hmm. So the way you access your Amazon or an Airbnb is what people would like in their professional career. So rather than putting a yellow cable for an Ethernet, they just want it to be Wi-Fi enabled at perhaps multiple Gbps which you're getting at home, not 100/10 Mbps which is working. So speed and impatience is the other paradigm that which is really driving. The third is people are moving away from what they call on-prem in terms of having all your information assets or data assets in on-prem through your own data centers onto the cloud. And the fourth is that you really need capacity at the click of a button. So if you're onboarding a new customer or you're hiring 10,000 people in a quarter, which is the norm for some of the tech companies, you can't come back and say that I will take 2 months to provision someone. You need it right here, right now.
Sure.
So managing capacity, managing scale in what they call ultra scalable, ultra fast, and ultra reliable, is the name of the game. And as a result, everyone is moving on to the cloud. That's a fundamental shift that we have seen. Now, because this shift has happened, people have started suddenly moving away from a traditional security paradigm of having hundreds of security controls from what they call the perimeter, or colloquially the firewall, to your end user asset, which could be a desktop or a laptop or a mobile. So instead of having heavy firewalls and web application firewalls going down to your antivirus and DLP and proxy, there are hundreds of controls that those could potentially sit in an enterprise. But if you look at a cloud environment where people, especially after the pandemic, are actually sitting at their homes using different types of networks and accessing the same corporate applications like an ERP or your email, you need to still bring in that through what they call a zero trust framework, which has really caught on. So I can see a consolidation of three key driving forces: AI, which is here to stay; building trust, which is physical trust, digital trust, human trust; and then of course cyber risk and security. And just to add on what Hasit was saying, nowadays the attack cost is about $3 to $4 by putting in bots. But the average impact on a large enterprise is about $3.5 million. So you can do the maths in terms of what is the reputational issue and what is the information damage that you can actually do. And there are close to 22,000 attacks that happen every day on large corporates. Most of them, of course, are not published because they want to keep their reputation intact. So bringing in a zero trust framework where moving away from a paradigm that if you enter a campus of a company, 10,000 people, then you have access to every building, every employee. That used to be it. So it's this massive fortress moat. You cross the moat and you're in and you have access to everything. In comparison, now you have access based on your identity and the information that you seek. That's a very different shift. So application segmentation, network segmentation, looking at staying away from all the classical types of attacks. So whether it's phishing, whether it's DDoS, you name it, there are enough terminologies available out there. So how do enterprises start protecting themselves and be smarter? And the flip side of that is that if you have to be smarter than the hacker, which has now become an organized cyber crime, and there are not too many cyber laws which protect you, you can't go ahead and start innovating. Earlier companies used to believe that we'll take 5 years and build a solid platform and we'll move ahead. By the time the technology would have moved far ahead and you would have been outpaced by the hackers. So how do you partner with someone with trust, which is the other factor you have to look at? And one of the companies that I'm advising is ZScaler, which is now about $1 billion annualized revenue. How do you trust the person that you deal with? How do you pass on the keys of the kingdom, which means right from your access to your applications, to your Active Directory, which people try and keep it internally, but now it's moved on to the cloud. For example, Azure Active Directory, like people talk about. Mm-hmm. So this fundamental shift of classical physical security to zero trust, a buy versus a build, an on-prem versus a cloud, a fixed device versus a movable asset. All of these are complicating this journey. And I would call it a journey because it's never a one-stop shop that you implement zero trust and you're done with it. So if the internet traffic is 50% bots and 50% of that traffic is going to be harmful bots, then you have to be on your toes every second and trust everything around you, including the partners that you have. So that's a longish answer to your brief question.
Sure, sure. No, thank you. And in fact, I'll come to some parts of it in one of my later questions. So I'll park my thoughts for that. Hasit, your views?
Difficult to add on top of what already Rohit has covered, because he has covered extremely well across the spectrum. Two, three things I would like to say, which probably might be additional, I don't know. That AI is a multidisciplinary technology, truly speaking, correct? It's not something which you see as an standalone. You see AI getting into cloud, you see AI into analytics, you see AI into automation, you see AI into cybersecurity, metaverse, everywhere, correct? It just gets infused so seamlessly across this thing, and it makes more difficult to manage this piece, correct? This coupled with the fact that the digital workforce in any enterprises will be far more in numbers than the human workforce, correct? So while today all the cybersecurity principles, policies are around the human accessing certain things, correct? But you suddenly realize that if some company is having 50,000 manpower, probably 5 years down the line, there 50,000 bots will be there, correct? It may be RPA bots, it can be chat bots, it can be decision bot of AI or machine learning. But this proliferation will have to be controlled in a structured manner, correct? And enterprises built up the human resources management system to manage humans, but there's no equivalent digital workforce management system, correct? So when you do not even know that what kind of people, see, one of the principle of cybersecurity is the identity, correct? You have to have the identity of who is coming and going and out, and you should have a unique identifier. Now you are putting all the effort, and similarly, identifier for devices also is a critical aspect. Now, but you don't have identifier for the bots, correct? That is completely uncontrolled way it's proliferating, and suddenly it becomes as big as this thing, and you don't even have thought about this thing. So, and it's getting infused into every part of the business in a very unstructured manner at a very, very rapid pace, and suddenly you realize it's become big to unmanageable. I think this is something at least worries me, because I'm confident that the CISOs of the world will take care of my network, they will take care of the data, hopefully, and ZScaler of the world will take care of other things, correct? But my worry is that the bot ecosystem, which is so expanding, we don't have mechanisms which the technology mechanism exists. It's not that it doesn't exist, but enterprise have not thought about enough of these things to address this bot proliferation and the security aspect of that thing. That is one aspect. It was pretty large, this thing. And second aspect is that at times we can try to be overboard in making everything trustworthy, correct? Which can slow down the adoption also. So if you worry too much about that, okay, is it suddenly everybody started talking about the explainability of AI, correct? Now, it's a favorite topic and responsible. Yes, if you are able to explain, then of course trust will increase. But we have to take a call. For example, weather forecasting, you got a forecast, you don't need an explanation, correct? Nobody asked for the explanation why, nobody will try to understand as a layman. If somebody's telling tomorrow it will rainfall or it will be a thunderstorm, nobody asked for the explanation. So similarly, in your enterprise ecosystem, you have to take a bet that what you really want to get an explanation, what you don't want really, correct? Because there is a cost of explanation, time to do this thing. And running a business is like always taking a trade-off calls, correct? And those trade-off calls has to be taken appropriately. Otherwise, we'll be slowing down this beautiful technology adoption in the fear of something going wrong. These are the only two things. And I think the only mechanism is that because this all CXOs, CTO, CDO, CTO, CIO, so many technology-led these days CXO exist, that if they can work together, set up right governance mechanisms to look after these aspects and put appropriate technology in place, I think it's a solvable problem. But ensuring and being aware of this thing is the first step to solve the problem.
Sure. Thank you, Hasit. And in fact, you did also touch upon the role of CXOs and at a board level, at a top-down level, how this should happen. So thanks for that. My next question, maybe I'll start with you, Hasit, on what is there's of course one aspect to securing AI is securing the data itself. So data protection itself becomes a topic of interest. So Any thoughts on how that can be approached and what are enterprises doing today, purely to protect, or say on the data protection front, which in turn leads to secure and trustworthy AI?
I think, as I said, I think more we go siloed to see only data or only network or the identity or devices, I think we have to see the subject holistically. Because if you see on data sits on application, correct? Sure. Application is surrounded by networks, and then that is used by devices or bots or this thing. So this is not a subject while we keep breaking for the convenience of the news CDOs of the world, new CTOs of the world, because there is chief data officer, so they will say, okay, I want to worry about data. Somebody says, I am the chief cybersecurity, so he will typically, in traditional manner, he will worry about the infrastructure and networks. But I think the holistic looking at the risk, I would say, of the technology-led risk is something very important. It has to be looked into in context of responsible AI, which also include fair, bias, ethics, accountability, reproducibility aspect. So my only suggestion to enterprises is that look at holistically. Data is of course important, but before somebody reaches to data, there are multiple layers are there, correct? And you have to ensure that they are responsible and security. See, while security is widely talked, responsible AI is less talked, or it is talked only for this kind of panel discussion, not in real enterprises. I think that we have to see holistically, and be aware of that thing. First step is to being aware. I think if you're aware, then always problem can be solved. Humans are smart and they will be able to solve the problem. And we have a decent regulatory ecosystem like personal data protection law and GDPRs of the world, correct? If you just follow that in letter and spirit appropriately, I think the more or less policy governance frameworks and the recommendations are in place. It is within your enterprises, how do you accommodate, looking at your priority, constructs, your organization silos, and how to bring things together, I think is the key, and it has to be looked holistically.
Sure.
That's all I will say.
Yeah. Sure. Rohit, your thoughts?
I'm just conscious of the time, otherwise you can speak hours on this topic.
Sure.
You can peel the onion in multiple ways when you look at data. The first is when you look at data individually, for an application or for a data set, you have to worry about what I call the 3 V's, which is volume of data, velocity of data, and the variety of data.
Okay.
And each one of them is a different stream by itself. But then when you start taking individual data, from a traditional RDBMS to a NoSQL, for example, and you start populating it across multiple application set, and then keep moving it from a functional area to an enterprise level, and then moving the data outside the enterprise in terms of your ecosystem, supply chain, partners, and so on. The complexity just keeps increasing across those 3 V's. So one way is to just look at these 3 angles, X, Y, Z core, axis for data. The second way to peel the onion is, like Hasit aptly said, how do you look at the entire technology chain? So one was the data chain, the second was the functional chain, and the third is the technology chain. Right from the networks to the infrastructure, to cloud, to security, to data. That's a second way to look at how you can manage, understand, and then, do whatever, cyber risk and security and data management on top of that. The third is your enterprise policies and procedures, which are very well documented normally, and you'll have the big 4 come and audit them. Sure. Or of course, you have your compliance mechanisms like CCP and GDPR, like was mentioned earlier. How do you adhere to data standards when you're servicing people outside of your enterprise itself? The fourth, of course, is you have beautiful systems to manage all these 3 tenets that I talked about. How do you provide access to this data? Like I was saying, pre-zero trust, once you enter the application domain, then the whole campus, the whole application, the whole data set is available to you. How do you use your identity? How do you use, a little crude, but your device IP management your hardware software tokens, which are very, very popular still, but basically focusing on identity through multi-factor authentication to get access to that data which you are actually looking at. The fifth part is that even if you get what we call authenticated and authorized for a data set, how much of it you can actually see. So there is a technology called data reduction. Again, AI comes into the play, where you actually mask some amount of data. For example, if you're doing a loan processing, then some people capture religion, archaic, but they still do.
Yeah.
But what has that got to do with your loan processing? Blank that data out.
Yeah.
Caste, color, creed, a lot of people still take that data. I don't know why, but you should mask that data so that you take an absolutely unbiased judgment call. If you're doing, for example, credit card backend operations, which BPO industry in India, for example, is very famous for, can you actually see the credit card number, or the entire, is masked and it's only the transaction that showed to you? So the fifth element of it is that how much of it you can read, write, and access is the main thing. And to manage all of this, you need all the CXOs to come under one umbrella. So for example, your CIO, CISO, who are normally joined to the hip, your CDO plus CDO, which is your digital officer and the data officer, again have to come together. All the HR heads, the operating officers, your legal counsel, anyone who's functionally or technically responsible for data need to come together. And in my view, data represents trust, data represents reputation, data determines brand, data management. And it has to become a key KRA for the CEO and the board. The moment you look at this from a different lens through across all these layers with a different mindset change, then comes AI who can help you implement, but the ethos has to change dramatically within the human mind.
Sure, sure. So that makes, and this maybe is my last question given the time. You did mention multiple times, Rohit, on the zero trust model, right? So you said there is this zero trust model. You bring everything under within a boundary, and then so from then on you take things forward. So is there a new model now? So what's next on the zero trust front?
On a lighter note, Avi, I'll just tell you, when I took over the CIO role and I was holidaying with my parents somewhere in northern part of India, chilling out in the summer, I got a call from our CEO, and he gave about a 1 hour drill down of what my responsibilities are. And in the end, he put the cherry on the icing, saying, Rohit, the only way you can get fired is if there is a cyber attack on the company. That's it. The rest, everything is pardonable. And a lot of people welcomed me to the CIO role saying, do you know the full form of CIO? And I said, absolutely, yes. And they said, CIO means career is over. So there were people who were, warning me and readying me for my job, predominantly from a risk and security perspective, because that's what, drives a brand. If your ERP is down for 24 hours, it is harakiri, but you can still live. But if there is a data of an external customer that gets leaked or locked or is under a Bitcoin demand, through any kind of attacks like Maze, then I'm saying you're done for. You better pack your bags and maybe reach the Himalayas to do some penance and thinking. But the idea about zero trust is to remove the dependency on humans, to keep having a technology which is smarter than the hackers in terms of machine learning, cognition, and ultimately AI, where you move away from what I call a data-driven AI to a model-driven AI. Because data-driven is dependent on a type of data set for a type of industry, whereas a model can actually take in multiple types of data sets. So making a fundamental shift to a model-driven decision-making, looking at partners who can provide the edge, whereas you still keep control, but the implementation and execution is through partners, because they can perhaps innovate at speed with you. And the last, of course, is that actually go, if you've seen this movie Hunger Games, you trust no one.
Yeah.
And the whole idea about zero trust is actually trust no one. Though I still believe that's not the right paradigm, because you have to trust someone. If someone is managing your Active Directory, you have to trust that human in some way. But zero trust fundamentally believes that you must have a maker checker and you must trust no one against the human principle. So if you start going with this model where everything will be on the cloud outside your physical premises, and you have to trust no one, then, like I said, application segmentation, network segmentation, looking at identity-based access, and then ultimately AI driving near real time. It's like Tom Cruise reading a message which self-destructs after he reads the message in Mission
In
Impossible.
5 seconds, yeah.
That's the kind of response time and evolution and learning which an AI must have, which is faster than a human, more complex, and at scale. So it's an exciting journey. A lot of people have already embarked on zero trust. I think time will tell how it will evolve, but it's always, like I say, a game between in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader. It's a cat and mouse game, Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
So let's see who finally wins. Someone comes at top sometime, but ultimately technology as a whole will keep evolving.
Great. No, thank you. In fact, there are again, this whole chat has given me so many topics. So data driven, model driven. I know the industry is divided on this. Maybe a separate conversation for the next fireside chat that we have. Hasit, any closing remarks from your side?
No, I think it was fantastic learning various new aspects from Rohit. I think it was a pleasure listening to you. Thanks, Rohit, for joining us here.
Indeed. Thank you, Rohit. Thanks, Hasit. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a fantastic day. Cheers.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.